Hello, I have a story for you to sleep better. Come closer and let the story begin.
Kings and queens claimed their authority by divine will. They did not merely govern land, they embodied it. Their bodies were symbols, their voices were law. Their failures became famine, war, or rebellion. From a distance, medieval royalty appears dazzling. Gold crowns, velvet robes, endless banquets, music echoing through vast halls, hunting parties and tournaments beneath bright banners. But behind the splendor lay a very different reality. A life governed by ritual, by surveillance, by expectation, by fear. As your eyelids begin to grow heavier, imagine stepping into that life for a moment. Imagine royalty, born not into freedom, but into duty. From the moment of your birth, your future is decided by others, your marriage, your faith, your enemies. Even your children's names are chosen for political meaning rather than love. Now follow me quietly through the corridors of a great stone residence. The floor beneath your feet is uneven, covered with rushes and woven mats to dull the sound of footsteps. The walls are thick, cold to the touch, hung with tapestries that soften both the air and the silence. Torches flicker, casting long shadows that stretch and shrink as if alive. Somewhere far away, a guard shifts his weight. Keys jingle softly. A door closes with a heavy, final sound. This is the inner world of medieval power. We arrive at the private chamber of a ruling household, a place both intimate and never truly alone. Dawn has not fully arrived. A pale line of light slips through a narrow arrow slit, brushing across embroidered fabric, catching the gold thread of a tapestry depicting saints, forests, and hunting scenes frozen in time. A hearth glows gently, its embers breathing warmth into the room. The scent of ash, beeswax, and dried herbs lingers in the air. Lavender and rosemary have been sewn into small linen bundles and placed near the bed too. Sweeten the atmosphere and ward off illness. The bed itself is massive, raised high above the floor. Thick posts support a canopy draped in heavy cloth, not for luxury, but for warmth. Curtains can be drawn tight against drafts, shadows and wandering eyes. Within, the rulers of the realm sleep. Not peacefully, perhaps, but deeply. Soon, a soft knock. The day begins. Servants enter quietly, trained to move without startling their sovereigns. A basin of warmed water is carried in. Clean linen cloths are folded with care. Clothing is prepared in precise order. Dressing a monarch is never a simple act. Each layer communicates rank, stability, legitimacy. Linen closest to the skin, wool for warmth, a fitted tunic, a belt bearing a subtle emblem, a cloak clasped with a small but meaningful brooch. Nothing is random. The queen is attended by her ladies, women chosen not only for birth, but for loyalty and discretion. Hair is brushed slowly, carefully. Braids are arranged. A ribbon is tied just so. A circlet rests lightly upon her head, not the crown, but enough to mark authority. Before any words of state are spoken, there is prayer. In a private chapel nearby, lit only by candles and early morning light, the rulers kneel side by side. The priest murmurs familiar Latin phrases, worn smooth by repetition. Incense curls upward, blurring the edges of the room. The air feels thick, almost dreamlike. In this moment you must bow. For medieval royalty, faith is not optional, it is foundation. To rule without God's favor is to invite chaos. When the prayers end, the world rushes back in Messengers arrive with sealed letters. Courtiers gather, advisors wait with carefully chosen words. Disputes over land, marriage proposals disguised as alliances, rumours of unrest at the borders. Power, in this age, never sleeps. And yet, beneath the authority, beneath the ritual, there remains a human being, a person who tires, who doubts, who remembers slights and losses long after ceremonies end. To understand that humanity, we must look beyond the throne itself. And so, in the next part of our journey, we will follow the life of a powerful medieval ruler not copied from any chronicle, but shaped from the truths of the age. A woman of influence and confinement, of ambition and endurance, of silence and survival. For now, let the chamber fade. Let the voices soften. The sun rises slowly through the mist, and the palace is now fully awake. Footsteps multiply in the courtyard. Horses breathe clouds of steam into the air. Metal armor brushes softly against metal. An oven door opens, and the scent of fresh bread spreads between the stone walls. Royal life looks magnificent from the outside, but from within, it is ordered and exhausting. The Queen's day rarely belongs to her. This Queen's name is Serafini. Serafini was born in a region near the misty northern coasts. Her father was a small but clever duke, her mother a quiet woman with a sharp mind. She grew up in palaces, but not by believing in palace fairy tales. From childhood, she learned to notice who spoke and when, and who chose silence. She understood early that power does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it travels in whispers. In the medieval world, power was never meant to stand alone. A crown without faith was seen as hollow. Authority without divine favour was fragile. And so, for kings and queens, religion was not merely personal belief. It was performance, obligation, and protection all at once. Each day in the royal household was shaped by prayer. Long before the court fully stirred, bells echoed through stone corridors, calling the household to devotion. In chapels tucked deep within castle walls, candles were lit while the sky outside was still grey. The scent of incense clung to woolen cloaks and silk sleeves alike. For Queen Serafini, faith was both refuge and responsibility. She knelt where generations before her had knelt, on the same worn stone, beneath the same painted saints whose eyes seemed to follow every movement. The prayers were familiar, spoken so often they required no thought, yet their meaning weighed heavy. To rule was to answer not only to men, but to God. The royal chaplain often reminded her of this truth. In careful words, never accusing, never demanding, he spoke of humility, obedience, and divine order. A ruler was chosen, not created. Elevated, not entitled. Public devotion mattered deeply. When the Queen appeared at Mass, every gesture was observed. The depth of her bow, the length of her silence, the steadiness of her gaze during the reading of scripture. These details travelled far beyond the chapel walls, carried by servants, courtiers, and visiting nobles into every corner of the realm. Piety was reassurance. In uncertain times, a visibly devout ruler calmed the people. It suggested stability, moral order, and heavenly approval. Even skeptics understood the value of belief when belief kept unrest at bay. But private faith was different. At night, when the castle quieted and the corridors emptied, Serafini often returned alone to the chapel. No ceremony, no witnesses, only candlelight and the soft echo of her own breath. Here, she allowed herself doubt. She prayed not for victory or glory, but for clarity, for restraint, for the strength to choose the least damaging path when no good options remained. She prayed for her children, knowing that love was the one thing her position could never fully protect. Religion offered comfort, but it also demanded sacrifice. The liturgical calendar ruled court life as firmly as any law. Days of fasting stripped the royal table of meat and excess. Even the Queen ate simple meals during Lent, setting an example that was carefully noted by clergy and chroniclers alike. On great holy days, the restraint vanished. Christmas and Easter transformed the court. Cathedrals filled with voices. Gold vessels gleamed beneath vaulted ceilings. Choir sang until sound itself seemed to rise into the stone. On teaser days, the Queen wore her most elaborate regalia, not to display vanity, but to reflect heavenly splendour made visible on earth. In those moments, the line between ruler and symbol disappeared. The crown was no longer a personal burden. It became an offering. Yet not all rulers carried their faith gently. Some clung to religion out of fear. Others wielded it as a weapon. Serafini had seen both. She had watched lords justify cruelty as righteousness and kings excuse ambition as destiny. She learned to navigate belief carefully. Too much zeal invited suspicion. Too little invited condemnation. Balance was survival. The church, powerful in its own right, was both ally and threat. Bishops could legitimize a reign or quietly undermine it. A whispered accusation of impiety could erode loyalty faster than any army. Serafini understood this well. She endowed monasteries, funded the repair of chapels, and corresponded respectfully with abbots and scholars. But she never surrendered control. Faith guided her. It did not rule her. In the minds of the people, however, the connection between throne and altar was inseparable. A good queen was a godly queen. A bad harvest was a sign of divine displeasure. A sudden illness was interpreted as judgment. Every misfortune became a question of moral failure. And so, beneath the incense and ritual, beneath the hymns and sacred vows, lay constant pressure. To appear poor, to rule justly. To never seem uncertain. Faith comforted the soul, but it tightened the crown. As night fell over the kingdom and the bells rang their final prayer, Serafini returned to her chambers. The candles were dimmed. The chapel doors closed. Silence returned. Yet, even in rest, the sacred weight remained. Tomorrow would bring more prayers, more ceremonies, more expectations, and soon more trials. Because faith could steady a throne, but it could not prevent ambition. Power in a medieval court rarely announced itself loudly. It arrived quietly, in lowered voices exchanged beside a hearth, in glances held a moment to long across a council table, in invitations that excluded one name on purpose. For Queen Serafini, court politics was never a single battle. It was weather constant, shifting, impossible to ignore. The great hall appeared harmonious to outsiders. Lords bowed. Ladies smiled. Wine flowed. Music softened the air. But beneath that polished surface lay calculation. Every noble present carried an agenda. Some sought land. Some sought marriage alliances. Some sought revenge for insults delivered years earlier and never forgotten. Serafini had learned early that loyalty in court was rarely permanent. It was conditional, transactional, and easily redirected. The council chamber was where this reality revealed itself most clearly. Long oak tables scarred by generations of debate. Heavy chairs arranged in careful hierarchy. Sunlight filtering through narrow windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like unspoken thoughts. Here, Men argued over borders, taxes, troop movements, and succession. Voices rose, hands struck wood. Oaths were sworn loudly, then quietly reinterpreted later. Serafini rarely spoke first. She listened. She noticed which lords spoke over others, which avoided eye contact, which repeated phrases they had clearly rehearsed, which changed position when the room shifted. Patience was her shield, but patience alone was never enough. There came a season when unrest spread through the eastern provinces. A dispute over inheritance between two noble houses escalated into open defiance. Armed men gathered. Crops were withheld. Roads became dangerous. The council demanded swift punishment. Some urged force, others counselled delay. A few suggested compromise, though none wished to appear weak. Serafini spoke only once. She proposed sending a royal envoy rather than troops, not to negotiate but to listen, to nation, to learn who truly benefited from the unrest. The suggestion was met with thin smiles. Several lords dismissed it as softness. Weeks later, the envoy returned. The unrest had been carefully fueled by a third party, a powerful noble who stood to gain from prolonged instability. His name had never been spoken aloud in council, but everyone knew it. Serafini said nothing. She didn't need to. Revelation shifted the room. Accusations were redirected. Alliances recalculated. The balance of power adjusted without a single public confrontation. This was how survival worked at court. Not through dominance, but through timing. Yet subtlety bred resentment. Some nobles began to view the queen not as a stabilizing presence, but as a threat, a woman who saw too much, who remembered too well, who did not forget slights. Whispers followed her through corridors, that she manipulated the king, that she favoured certain houses, that she aimed to rule beyond her station. None were spoken openly, all were dangerous. Serafini responded as she always did. She remained visible. She attended feasts, she hosted audiences. She laughed when laughter was expected. She showed mercy publicly and restraint privately. But she also prepared. Trusted servants were quietly reassigned. Messengers were vetted. Letters were read twice. Seals were checked carefully. Because court intrigue did not always announce itself before striking. The most dangerous threats wore familiar faces. A lord who once pledged loyalty hesitated too long before kneeling. A council member began missing meetings. A marriage proposal arrived unusually quickly, carrying conditions that revealed more than they concealed. And then came the betrayal. Not dramatic, not violent. Administrative. A document was delayed. A decision reversed without explanation. A rumour allowed to spread without correction. Suddenly, Seraphine's authority felt thinner. She was not removed, not accused, not confronted. She was simply bypassed. Meetings held without her knowledge, letters answered without her seal. Advisors who once sought her counsel now avoided her gaze. This was how power was taken in the medieval court, quietly. By the time the public noticed, it was already done. Serafini recognized the pattern. She withdrew. Not in deflation, she reduced her appearances, limited her speech, allowed others to believe their maneuvering had succeeded. And while they celebrated prematurely, she waited, because ambition is rarely patient. Those who grasp to quickly leave themselves exposed. When the moment came, it was not Serafini who moved. It was the consequences of poor judgment. A mismanaged levy angered the eastern towns. A broken promise fractured an alliance. A careless insult ignited a feud. Suddenly, the council needed stability again. Suddenly, they needed her. And Serafini returned to the chamber not as a challenger, but as a solution. She spoke calmly, offered structure, proposed compromises that saved pride while restoring order. Those who had undermined her now praised her wisdom. This too was politics. By the time night fell, the Queen walked the palace corridors alone. Torches flickered against stone. Footsteps echoed softly. She paused at a window overlooking the courtyard. The banners stirred gently in the evening wind. Power was never secure. It required vigilance, adaptation, emotional restraint. And the greatest cost was solitude. Because to rule wisely, one could never fully trust. When the doors of the great hall closed and the echoes of voices faded, the castle changed its character. By night, it was no longer a stage. It became a maze of shadows, drafts, and unspoken thoughts. For Queen Serafini, evenings were the most revealing hours of the day. Public life demanded composure. Court life demanded performance. But private life, what little of it, demanded endurance. Her marriage had never been built on intimacy. It had been negotiated across tables, sealed with wax, and sanctified beneath vaulted ceilings. The words spoken at the altar were sacred, but they were also practical. Duty came first. Affection, if it arrived at all, was incidental. King Aldemar had been courteous, correct, distant. He shared meals, he shared airs, but he rarely shared his inner world. His concerns were spoken aloud only in council, never in the quiet of their chambers. When disagreements arose, they were framed as policy, never emotion. In time, Serafini learned not to expect closeness. The royal bedchamber was large enough to feel empty even when occupied. Curtains muffled sound but not absence. Candles burned low. A fire crackled softly, more for warmth than comfort. Servants assisted with undressing, their presence a reminder that even rest was supervised. Only when the doors finally closed did silence arrive. And silence, for a ruler, could be unsettling. In those hours, Serafini allowed herself thoughts she never voiced by day. She wondered who she might have been had her life not been claimed by treaties and expectations. She wondered whether her children would ever truly know her, or only the role she played. She wondered how much of her strength had been learned, and how much had been forced upon her. Loneliness was not dramatic. It did not announce itself with tears or despair. It settled slowly, like cold stone beneath thin slippers. Yet she endured it, as medieval rulers often did, because isolation was the price of authority. A queen could not confide freely. A misplaced word could become a rumor. A private doubt could be weaponized. Even kindness could be misinterpreted as weakness. So Serafini learned to keep her truest thoughts for the darkest hours. At times, she turned to writing. Not official correspondence, not decrees or proclamations, but quiet reflections scratched onto parchment meant for no one else. Pages she later burned. Words released into ash. Other nights, she sat by the window and watched the courtyard below. Guards pacing predictable routes. Torches flaring, then dimming. The kingdom resting, unaware of the calculations that never truly slept. Motherhood offered moments of warmth, but also distance. Her children were raised among tutors and attendants. They addressed her with respect before affection. Love existed, but it was filtered through formality. Even bedtime visits were scheduled, observed, and brief. A queen could nurture, but she could not cling. As the years passed, the weight of these constraints became familiar, not lighter, but manageable. And then came the nights after Aldemar's death. The bedchamber grew colder, no footsteps, no shared meals, no expectation of conversation. Only memory. Grief was private, restrained, and inconvenient. The realm required stability, not mourning. Serafini wore black, observed custom, and resumed her duties. But at night, the absence was undeniable. She missed not the man he had been, but the certainty of routine, the predictability of shared existence, the knowledge that another presence occupied the space, even in silence. Widowhood granted freedom, but it also stripped illusion. Now, truly alone, she confronted the full reality of her position. Power without partnership, authority without intimacy. Yet, even in solitude, she found resolve. The quiet hours sharpened her mind. Without distraction, she reflected more clearly. She recognized patterns. She anticipated moves before they unfolded. She prepared for futures others had not yet imagined. Night became her ally. It was here, in candlelit stillness, that she rehearsed conversations, measured risks, and decided when to act and when to wait. Sleep, when it came, arrived gently. Dreams were not always kind. Sometimes they carried echoes of childhood voices, unfamiliar faces, paths not taken. But more often, they were empty, weightless, merciful. And in that emptiness, Serafini rested, because dawn would come, and with it, another day of rule. Time moves differently for those who wear a crown. For ordinary people, years pass marked by seasons, harvests, births, and losses. For rulers, time is measured in reigns, treaties, betrayals, and the slow erosion of certainty. For Queen Serafini, age did not arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly. A stiffness in the hands on cold mornings. A longer pause before standing. A growing preference for listening rather than speaking. Aging, for a medieval ruler, was not merely personal. It was political. An older queen invited questions. An aging regent invited impatience. Those who waited years for influence began to grow restless. Younger nobles pressed forward, eager to be seen, eager to be remembered. Serafini understood this instinct well. She had once been young herself. But she also understood something they did not. That power is not held by force alone, but by continuity. She began to prepare. Not openly, not dramatically, quietly. She encouraged her son to preside more often in council, allowing him to speak, to err, to learn. She placed experienced advisors near him, men she trusted not for their brilliance, but for their restraint. She withdrew just enough to make space. Not enough to vanish, not enough to weaken authority. Just enough. This balance was delicate. Step back too far, and rivals would fill the vacuum. Remain too present, and resentment would fester. The art lay in appearing indispensable while allowing others to believe they were advancing. Serafini mastered this art. She turned her attention increasingly toward matters that endured beyond a single reign, endowments to religious houses, the repair of roads and bridges, the copying of legal records, so disputes might be settled more fairly in generations to come. She understood that monuments need not always be stone. Sometimes they were systems. Sometimes they were habits. Sometimes they were memories held quietly by those who benefited from them. In the evenings, she reflected often on how she would be remembered, not in portraits or chronicles, which could be altered or destroyed, but in the shape of the realm itself, in the absence of chaos, in the continuation of peace. Legacy, she realized, was rarely dramatic. It was seul, and it was fragile. She had seen too many rulers undone by their desire to be admired, to many kings who chased glory and left disorder behind, to many queens remembered only through scandal or silence. Serafini wanted neither. She wanted endurance. As her strength waned, her authority softened rather than hardened. She no longer needed to dominate rooms. Her presence alone carried weight. Silence spoke on her behalf. When she did speak, people listened, because she spoke rarely. The final years were quieter. She spent more time in private chambers and gardens than in council halls. She read, she prayed, she wrote letters back to advise. She spoke more gently to her grandchildren than she ever had to her own children. Perhaps because she had nothing left to prove. When illness finally arrived, it did not announce itself as an enemy. It arrived as fatigued, as shortened days, as longer rests, as a growing awareness that the body, like a kingdom, cannot be ruled forever. The court reacted with ritual. Physicians were summoned, prayers were ordered, candles burned through the night. But Serafini knew. She had watched enough endings to recognize her own. On her final evening, she asked for quiet. No council, no ceremony, no formal address. Only candlelight and familiar walls. She lay beneath heavy coverings, the same tapestries watching as they had for decades, her breathing slow, her thoughts clear. She did not think of crowns. She thought of mornings by the sea in childhood, of music drifting through open windows, of choices made and not made, of survival. When Konch not Raimit, and the kingdom moved on, bells rang, courtiers gathered, mourning was declared, history turned its page. But traces remained. In the laws still followed, in the alliances that held, in the quiet stability others took for granted. As darkness settles over the medieval world once more, the castle grows still, torches dim. Guards slow their steps. The wind moves softly through arrow slits and along battlements worn smooth by centuries. Somewhere in those stone walls, generations of rulers have slept, dreamed, worried, and faded into memory. Kings and queens rise and fall. Names change, banners are replaced. But the human experience beneath the regalia remains. Ambition, fear, loneliness, hope, interest. So as you lie where you are now, far from that world, yet connected to it, allow the echoes to fade. Let the council chambers empty, let the crowns rest on velvet cushions. Let the candles burn low. History can wait until morning. For now, sleep. Good night, dear listener, and may your dreams be calm, deep, and untroubled.